Welcome to this special explainer where we're going to arm you with a survival guide for a very specific and, let's be honest, very annoying piece of political messaging you've probably heard a million times.
Hey everyone, just a quick heads up, this is a special re-edit of a Sip&Talk podcast episode, and it's brought to you by our sponsor, Micky. We're going to dive right into the highlights and give you the key takeaways in just a few minutes.
So why are we talking about this? Well, this whole breakdown was actually inspired by a message we got from a listener in Taiwan. They said they were just getting totally overwhelmed by this one repetitive line of propaganda and asked if we could help dissect it. So that is exactly what we're going to do.
Okay, to really wrap our heads around just how absurd this propaganda is, let's start with a simple story. An analogy that really it perfectly captures the flawed logic we're dealing with here.
So picture this. A guy is just sitting there, minding his own business, eating his lunch. You know, a totally normal, everyday thing.
And then, out of absolutely nowhere, a stranger walks up, points a finger right at him, and starts yelling this wild accusation.
The stranger shouts, "You're relying on rice to plot for masculinity." I mean, just let that sink in for a second. The guy is just eating to live, and he's already a man. What could he possibly be plotting for?
It's bizarre, right? It makes no sense, and that is exactly the point. This analogy perfectly exposes the propaganda's biggest flaws. It accuses someone of plotting to become something they already are, all while they're just doing something essential for survival.
All right, now let's pull back the curtain and really deconstruct how this fill-in-the-blank style of propaganda actually works. Once you see the formula, you'll start spotting it everywhere.
The core phrase is always relying on X for independence. It's a template, right? And that X can be swapped out for literally anything. The US, Japan, buying arms, using AI, even balloons. The whole point is to make any international partnership or defensive move seem like some kind of secret, sinister plot.
This whole argument really falls apart when you look at its three massive logical flaws. First, we have the flawed premise. It accuses Taiwan of plotting for independence, totally ignoring the fact that it's been de facto independent for decades. Second, there's inverted causality. It frames defensive actions, which are a reaction to threats, as some kind of aggressive plotting. And third, the one that's just so obvious, the glaring double standard. And this slide just lays it out so clearly. You hear the accusation, Taiwan is relying on the US to plot for independence, but you'll never hear that same logic applied to their own alliances, like China is relying on Russia to plot for hegemony. See, it's a complete one-way street.
So, the million-dollar question, how do you even begin to respond to this without getting tangled up in their twisted logic? Well, let's open up the toolkit and look at a few really effective strategies.
We've got 5 core methods here, each for a different situation. You can use humor to show how silly the argument is. You can use logic and facts to tear it down. You can flip it on its head by talking about values. Or you can just refuse to play their game and change the subject entirely. Let's look at each one.
Okay, method 1 is all about using humor. You basically exaggerate their own formula to show how ridiculous it sounds. So if they say, you're relying on arms for independence, you could come back with, oh, and you're relying on missiles to plot for intimidation? It completely deflates their argument by turning it back on them.
Now, for a more serious approach, you can go with logic and facts. You can just point out the double standard directly. Hey, you rely on country X, so what's the problem? Or you can bring up historical facts, like how China itself relied on foreign help from the USSR or even the US to build up its own military.
And finally, you can take the high road. You can reframe the whole thing around values. Democracies work with allies to keep the peace, while autocracies use force to threaten people. Or even better, just don't take the bait. Instead of answering their question, ask a better one. Like, instead of talking about what we rely on, why don't we talk about the future we're trying to build?
Because look, the real goal here isn't just to win some petty argument. It's about taking back control of the conversation and framing it on your own terms.
And this is the key takeaway. It's about transforming their negative word, plotting, into a positive mission. The real goal isn't plotting for a status, it's plotting for a future that's built on freedom and democracy, something almost everyone can get behind.
So we'll leave you with this question to chew on. The next time you hear this argument, now that you have this toolkit and you understand the formula, how are you going to respond? You've got options now.
We really hope this breakdown was helpful. If you want more deep dives like this, make sure to subscribe to the Sip&Talk podcast. And of course, you can find a link to our sponsor Micky's channel right down there in the description. Thanks so much for watching.